Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. So today we're going to be talking about technology and managing uncertainty in your fleets and building for the future. So my name is Joe Lavinger. I'm a business reporter with Bloomberg, mainly covering the Texas economy. And so for these last few months, trade has been the central story for us. And so this industry is right at the center of what everyone in the markets is trying to understand. And so I think people are just hungry for answers and ways to future-proof as best they can. So, hopefully, I believe my wonderful panelists will be able to help us all walk away with some insights for moving forward. So why don't we start with Carol, if you could just introduce yourself and tell the crowd a bit about what you do.
Hi, I'm Carol Smith. I'm the Director of Safety and Compliance for Transport at Estes Forwarding Worldwide. So I'm managing compliance of a fleet of, right now, it's about 90. So.
Great, thank you.
And my name is Jim Olsen. I'm actually currently on the advisory board for Motive, but I recently retired from a company called Republic Services. I was the head of safety for that company for the last 15 years, and we have a fleet of about 18,000 commercial vehicles across the country. So I'll share a little bit about resiliency and what we did at Republic to basically ensure that we're prepared for every day of business.
My name's Hamish. I work for Motive. I run an analytics group there. So as many of you saw yesterday, we presented Motive Analytics. That's part of my group, is actually the ones that build out all the data, bringing all your data together and building that out as a product. And then I have a separate part of the group that looks at how all that data gives us an idea of what's happening in the US. Across all million connected devices that we have, what are we seeing in the Port of Laredo? What are we seeing northern borders? A huge amount of information on that side. And we started that actually during COVID because there's so much uncertainty. So that's kind of my role and function at Motive.
Great, thank you so much. So we've got a great panel, people across the industry who will be able to help us out a little bit. And so why don't we start with Carol? There's just so much uncertainty in the economy right now.
There is.
It's every day I feel I wake up and there's 20 new stories to cover and people want to understand what's happening. How does that instability impact the way that you're managing fleets and your business?
Tightens everything up. We're watching every single penny that we're spending. We're watching all the activities our drivers are doing. We're watching the lanes that we're running and how we can be more efficient. We utilize a lot of the Motive software from the driver perspective. So we're using the GPS to help us identify what drivers are in what markets and how we can better route freight, be more efficient in the freight routing. We watch the fuel spend. We watch how are the trucks operating. Are the trucks operating at their best? So using the maintenance platform, that's helpful. Watching the fuel spend. Are our drivers driving responsibly so they're getting the best mileage they can get? So every single penny counts. Another thing we're watching for is drivers who are not being productive. So that's a really big activity that we actually spend time on. Why are they sitting? Where are they sitting? How can we use Motive to help us identify this? So geofencing is a really large part of identifying that drivers are being productive in their days.
Right, so there's just so much monitoring going on.
Correct.
And efficiency, a drive for efficiency.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
And so, Jim, we were just talking about the uncertainty in markets, but I'm wondering, coming out of Washington too, there's a lot of uncertainty around regulation and what to expect. I'm wondering, what kind of changes are you tracking, and what should the audience be looking out for?
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time working through the Waste and Recycling Association. So one of the things I encourage you to do is whatever industry you're in, get involved with your association. So in Waste and Recycling, there's a National Waste and Recycling Association group, and they actually have an advocacy component to what they do that helps us keep track of legislation. And there are two big things coming up that everybody should be aware of. So DOT actually published an announcement about deregulation, where they're basically talking about scaling things back. And by May 5th, they're looking for comments associated with anything that maybe should be deregulated. So a really good example that they've already heard comments back on are hours of service. So no surprise, because of the hours of service changes that they did make, now they're talking about changing back to the way they used to be. So it is your opportunity to reach out by May 5th to get comments in on whatever you see as a challenge for you. One of the things we're also doing within the National Waste and Recycling Association is we're approaching FMCSA about actually creating a subset of regulations that actually apply specifically to short haulers. So if you read the regulations, which I think a lot of us are actively involved in that, it's all like long haul language. So when you regularly get an audit or a review, they get really confused in terms of, well, what do you mean you're short haul? What do you mean you're exempt from ELD requirements? So we're actually working with them on creating a subset of rules, and it wouldn't be that dissimilar from what OSHA has today, right? So OSHA today, you got general industry, you have construction, you have mining. DOT FMCSA has one big bucket for everybody. So I think that's something that we're working toward too. And then secondarily on the OSHA side, it does impact trucking pretty considerably when you read the regulations in detail. But from an OSHA perspective, by, I want to say it's June 5th, but it's sometime in June, they're looking for comment regarding the new heat standard. So under the Biden administration, they had launched and talked a lot about a new heat standard and requirements for basically people acclimatizing before they do work, which is a huge impact for waste and recycling. But they're looking for comments on that. More than likely, there'll either be a major revision to that standard or it won't roll out at all. But those are two opportunities for you, reaching out to DOT, reaching out to OSHA through those two mechanisms in order to get feedback.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much for that
you're
breakdown. And then Hamish, I think in times of uncertainty, there's nothing better than data and doing the best we can. No one has a crystal ball, but I'm wondering what you're seeing so far in terms of how Motive customers are, making sense of these changing rules surrounding cross-border trade specifically. You mentioned there's been a big uptick.
Yes. So I'd say probably what's already been mentioned is it's resilience and controlling what you can do is what I'm seeing a lot. If we think about it from the last 5 years, has been nothing but a set of global changes that impact your businesses and impact us as business as well. Nobody is insulated away from it. So in reality, you can influence that. You can, we even back to 2022, we had diesel go up to $5.71 across the U.S. It jumped 22% in 3 weeks. That movement and the changes that are happening are just impacts that you have to consume downstream. And so what we see when it comes to the customer side is resilience. So resilience is diversification of income streams. There's going to be a lot of disruption at different ports and I think really looking at short-term disruptions, we already see it. Port of Laredo is up 48% in terms of activity happening on that site. But you look at Port of LA, already in March, it's down 20% in terms of inbound containers. There's huge opportunities available, but there's also going to be areas that are going to be more impacted. And so resilience and diversification is something that will make very strong businesses just now. And then the other is visibility. Regardless, especially within trucking, we've had one of the worst trucking recessions, realistically the worst trucking recession that's kind of been on record. It has been exceptionally difficult. But it's forced everybody to get very granular on your costs. And if, at some point there will be light and the markets will go better, and those that can maintain their cost basis and really continue to grab every % of margin, and using tech does help that enormously in terms of knowing where your money goes, but knowing at a very granular level, that makes you a more resilient business. And so we're going to see it history teaches us that some of the biggest businesses will grow during this period of time as well. There will be mid-market businesses that go into enterprise leagues. It's a great opportunity, but it's going to be for those that can really build that model of a business that keeps the costs down, but also diversify into different income streams.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes.
So, Carol, when Jim was talking about changing regulations around worker safety, you were kind of nodding along.
So I was excited to see some of these things come out.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, how are you using technology also to kind of handle, there's a labor shortage, low amounts of CDL holders, and tighter worker safety expectations. Yeah, how are you managing that?
Well, it's complex. There's multiple factors that are involved in all of it. I mean, motive is a huge part of our monitoring systems. The market's changed during the trucking recession. So we were a fleet of 158 trucks when we first went into that recession, and due to market changes have had these reductions. But what we've done in the meantime is really shore up what lanes are effective for us, what customers are effective for us, utilizing the motive technology, utilizing our TMS system. And I mean, there's like 5 different systems. I'm not sure if you all are aware, but Estes Forwarding, we cover the entire market in transportation, in supply chain. So it's not just our trucking division that was affected, it's our truckload, it's our brokerage, our international brokerage, our in-house brokerage for the US. I mean, so our teams have been meeting for months ahead of time to strategize, to reduce, to catch every single penny. Finding a qualified driver right now is very difficult.
Wow. Yeah.
It's very difficult. And finding the type of driver that you want running in your fleet. So a lot of the drivers are getting out of the industry. I've known a lot of truck drivers that are selling their trucks or trying to. It's affecting the cost of trucks. It's affecting everything at this point.
And if I can ask, do you have any tips, in terms of ways that I'm sure you don't want to help people find drivers too much because then you'll lose them. But yeah, how are you working through that?
We're using every avenue that we can. I mean, there's probably 20 different avenues of people who are advertising for you and getting the market is getting that driver's attention. What do you have to offer that driver? What is going to attract that driver to come to you? And so we use multiple platforms to do that. We have a recruiting team that's helping us, and then they narrow it down. It comes to me, and then I get to qualify them. But it's a very difficult task right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, and if I can add on
please.
to that one a little bit.
Yes.
So when I was at Republic Services, and it's actually in Dallas is where we have it, but he's from Dallas. We actually built a tech center and our own CDL training school. So at Republic Services, we actually target young people that are looking for a career, and we either help you become a technician to work on a garbage truck, work on yellow iron, or become a driver. So we basically can issue CDLs throughout the country from our driver tech school. They basically learn how to pass the test, right? So they can actually get their CDL. And then we build training curriculum for when they get back to their division so they can be what we call route ready to operate a truck for us. But that was a huge game changer because there's certain markets in the country where, quite frankly, we can find drivers. We don't have issues finding drivers. There are other markets in the country where we can't find them at all. So we're like, we really need an application to grow our own. And what's interesting about it is we were a little late to the game in that. One of our biggest competitors is Waste Management. Everybody's heard of them, the big green company, right? They've been training their own drivers for 7 years. So they literally opened a driver training center in Florida and one in Phoenix. And they've been doing it for a long time. And it's very specific. It's line of business training. So when you go to Waste Management, you're going to learn how to drive this specific truck you're actually going to operate. So it's a big investment to do that. Not everybody can, but what you can do is partner with a driver training school. So I think everybody is aware that there's driver training schools out there, but you do want to partner with them, especially if you're in an industry like I was with waste and recycling, because we're all Class B drivers, we're driving straight trucks, and typically those CDL schools do Class A. So they're learning to drive tractor trailers, and it's just different, right? If you're going to be driving a straight truck, being trained on a straight truck is a better scenario, and they're going to be more successful.
Yeah.
You'll be more resilient in terms of stickiness of the person and less turnover. But that's a good way to actually do that.
Yeah, and we're diversifying and now getting into the Class B drivers. So this is something new that we're bringing into our operations.
Got it.
So educating, our team, we are not capable of having our own school. We do partner. I'm a very involved Minnesota Trucking Association member. So like he said, if you're not involved with your associations, get involved in your associations because the connections that they're giving us are priceless. And the relationships that they help you bridge or bridge these gaps and build with are everything, in all honesty.
That's fascinating. Thank you. And Jim, when we were talking yesterday, you mentioned some other kind of public-private partnerships that you've worked on. I'm wondering, what is the role of those in this?
Yeah, so we were very fortunate. I heard about it through a peer. One of the things that everybody's here for is motive, but obviously benchmarking with each other too, right? Encourage you to reach out to each other, peers in different industries to learn what they're doing. Diversity of thought is a really good thing, right? People coming from different perspectives. But in this particular case, I had heard about a group called Together for Safer Roads. And Together for Safer Roads is actually a worldwide organization. It was formed by the World Health Organization because the number one cause of death for people, I think it's under the age of 23, is vehicle crashes, right? So it's a health epidemic. Distracted driving is an epidemic. People are dying every day because of it. So we joined this association of companies, which is a combination of public-private companies, to basically make roadways safer for everybody. So the good example, specific example of this Together for Safer Roads group is AB InBev, Anheuser-Busch, and UPS, us at Republic, and New York City, City of London, are all working together to improve cab visibility. So if you look at over-the-road vehicles and a lot of local delivery vehicles in the States, we still have a lot of conventional cabs, right, which is the engine is in front. It's a huge blind spot, right? If you go over to Europe, you see a lot of cab overs where it's a flat front. And you'll also see expanded windshields. You'll see a different design like you see on school bus a lot for side view mirrors. You see more technology like motive associated with identifying who's in your area. And we're trying to build that through partnerships with both cities, states, and private entities that are working in that area. And we're making a lot of progress associated with some regulatory change. And I think you'll see some traction associated with that in large cities that is a game changer. A real good example here, if anybody's from Houston, is Houston did a study with Together for Safer Roads, and they identified 14 intersections that were the most hazardous within the greater Houston area. And by hazardous, I mean fatality rates, right? Pedestrians being struck by vehicles. We did an in-depth study with TSR on one of those 14, and one of the things we found, which was amazing, was there was an intersection that kids had to cross in order to go to school. There were 3 lanes of travel plus 2 turn lanes for each direction of travel. Wow. So these little kids had to cross 8 lanes of travel. There was no island in the middle. So if you couldn't get across 8 lanes of travel, guess what? Light's going to turn green, cars are going to come, and kids are still in the intersection. So literally, we saw siblings putting their younger, brothers, sisters in a grocery cart and pushing them across the street so the little kid could get across in time. And it's like, boom, roadway design, maybe that's an issue, right? Yeah. So they put an island in the middle, solve the problem. Because the little kids that can't get all the way across, get halfway across, wait for the light change, go the second halfway. So there's a lot of things that we're trying to do, and private entities can't do that alone. You have to partner with the public side in order to make true change in the environment that we work in.
Right. Hamish, I was down in Laredo a couple of weeks ago for a story, and it was just buzzing with activity. I'm wondering what you're seeing in the numbers in terms of, are you seeing a lot of pull forward? Where are how are retailers kind of stocking up, and if you could just kind of quantify that activity as much as possible.
So it's when we look at our data, so we're looking at obviously the trucks in that sort of geofence around Laredo. We see probably like about a 49% year-over-year increase in traffic, and wow, a huge volume. It's in reality, when you look at the trends, it's kind of like the holiday period never stopped in terms of relative activities. So you're seeing a lot of activity, not just crossing borders, that's one set of activities, but on either side you're seeing a lot of movement around the distribution centers. Stocking up on either side, or like inventory movements around the border. So it's a huge increase. Overall though, when you look at the types of things coming in especially, vehicle volumes have come up a little bit. They're about like 8% year-over-year increase. But things like computer parts and machinery, it's like That's up 48% as well, like year over year in terms of volumes. Huge amounts of computer components coming in cross-border right now, especially in January or late January, February, and March. You saw huge movements. And so obviously there's a lot of like pull forward. And I think one thing that I look at is 2025 is going to be unseasonal. Like it's going to be a bit stop-start in different areas. So you saw a huge pull forward in the first part of this year. So we'll see how Q2 kind of evolves. And I think even if we look at sort of the ports now, like the ports of LA, you saw this huge pull forward. Actually, January was one of the second highest month on record. There, like, you know, the previous high was in October, the previous year. And so you saw this huge pull forward, and then it just dropped off a cliff as you got into March. And so I think as we navigate this time period, what we're seeing just now is very elevated traffics, or very elevated activities. I expect that'll change through the course of the year, and we'll have a down period just to recompense. And obviously, the thing over everything from a retailer side is you're trying to predict demand. Like you're trying to see where like consumers are going to be spending in a few months' time as you order inventories. There's a lot of uncertainty there in the decision making, and so there's risk aversion happening. And I think we'll see that start to happen in inventories over the course of the year. So you know, it depends again how consumer sentiment stays and how bullish or bearish people are going to be when it comes to buying or bringing inventory into the country.
Right. Carol, again, I noticed, you know, when he was talking about warehousing, you know, I'm not sure of the best metaphor, but when I think of what a forwarding company does, and think quarterback or conductor of an orchestra, you know, and I'm wondering what advice you're giving folks specifically on warehousing strategy and right now.
Our warehousing is very active right now. There's a lot of people that are stocking up. The tariff situation has been very volatile for us, especially with all of the work that we do with brokerage, the air freight, the whole 9 yards. So right now, our warehousing is actually bulking up, and they're very active. And we'll see how this goes and how it trends as people start utilizing the products that they're storing. So it's been a very volatile thing. I know Michael, my coworker's here, and he spent most of yesterday on a situation with a customs deal that he was doing, and found out the customer we were trying to get a hold of was actually here. So they couldn't get a response. They weren't getting a response. They're in a safety meeting. They aren't going to be available today. And he's like, I got this. So
It's the center of the universe.
Right around the corner.
So ingenuity is going to be everything moving forward. One foot raised. We all have to be 1 foot raised right now, because things are going to change. They're going to change on a dime, and we have to be prepared to meet these changes.
Yeah. And, you know, a question sort of for the whole panel. In times like this, relationships are so important, and maintaining good relationships even under pressure. I'm wondering, you know, do you have any tips, or how are you making sure that, you know, you can be as reliable a partner as you can be?
Open communication for us, very important. Our salespeople are very busy right now, having those communications with our customers, reassuring them we're here to partner in every way that we can. You know, we're doing the same thing for our trucks. We're maintaining the trucks, keeping everything moving, so that when that customer needs those products moved, we're there, we're on time, and it's being done safely. So reliability is everything right now.
Yeah, and I'll answer that question more thinking internally with your organizations, and it's kind of a follow-up to what Hamish had said, but you know, everything that we heard with analytics and tools and how you can actually help your driver change their behavior, it doesn't replace one-on-one conversations, right? So one of the things I'm a huge advocate for supervisors is to do ride-alongs with drivers and spend time with them on their route and have conversations with them, because that builds relationships and, like you said, open communication, right? And what we found is where we had kind of the best NPS scores, right? Think of a supervisor and an NPS score based on their driver's perception. Where you have the best supervisor evaluation by drivers, that's the stickiness you want. And you don't turn over people. And at the end of the day, when you don't have driver turnover, you're a much more resilient organization. All the tools help direct you to kind of who you should focus on. But when it comes to actually having somebody to spend time with, you can't duplicate one-on-one. And it's kind of funny to bring it back to motive. I was having a conversation with a few different people in the room, and I think we're all pretty startled by that AI, trainer and how accurate it was, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, that's not a real person. That's the true value of us all getting together for events like this, is there's just no replacing the bonding that you get when you actually get to talk to somebody face to face. And don't forget that when you think of your own teams too, because that truly builds resiliency for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're a couple minutes out of schedule, but I'd like to open it up for Q&A. If anyone has any questions for our panelists, we've got 2 microphones, one here, one here. So please feel free to come up and grab a mic. We've got a few minutes left.
Don't be shy.
It's true.
Oh, there's a question. Oh, maybe we run, yeah.
Sorry, yeah. They're, there you go.
You talked a lot about recruiting and training, but I think we all know, no matter what the industry is, whether it's a tech company or a trucking company or a waste company, retention is way cheaper and way harder. So I would love for you guys to discuss some of the tactics that you're doing when you think that you're thinking about when it comes to keeping your employees, since I know, especially in the trucking space, it's something like a 95% turnover rate. And I know keeping drivers can be so hard.
So if you don't mind, I want to start out with that. So one of the programs that we started when we went live with Motive, been live 2.5 years, we've been using the product. I have a hundreds club. We call it the hundreds club. And these are the drivers in our fleet that have a perfect driving score. They have no hits. They're stopping at every stop sign. They're not speeding. They're not close following. So we celebrate these individuals. We have monthly recognitions. We have little gifts that we give them. So this month, the gift that I ordered for them, they don't know this yet, I think it's the coolest thing ever, is, when your 7-way plugs into your tractor. So we run all Class 8s. Majority of our fleet is Class 8 tractors. You plug your light cord in the 7-way and it's loose as they're running down the road. You see this when you're driving. If you haven't noticed this yet, look when you're driving on road. At night especially, lights flickering on the back of a trailer. So there's a company that makes a wedge that you can put into your 7-way so that your lights don't flicker. So this is going to be our thank you gift this month to the fleet. Inexpensive, $7.50 a thing. So low cost, high impact. And giving these and having these conversations when you give them out to the fleet is everything. These guys they're like, wow, you're thinking about me being safe out there, and they really appreciate that. Another thing that we do is we send a daily safety message through Motive. So it's something thoughtful, it's funny, humorous, or it'll be something that they'll go, but it's always something to make them think about the fact that we care. And letting them know that we care is everything. That's one of the things that I've always led with in my teams is we always lead with kindness. Our driver departures have been lack of work, not lack of care or respect. So that's a huge thing. When these guys are like, let me know when you get busy again. I want to come back here. And when they say that to you, that's everything. It's not something that you hear every day.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
No, I think you did it great.
I can throw the microphone around. Any questions? There was one over here, yeah. Was it you? Someone had a question over here. No? Okay.
Hiding. Well, I can ask questions in the meantime while y'all think.
We could talk for hours about this stuff. I just want you to know that.
Yeah. I have a lot of opinions on the New York Giants quarterback situation. I can also talk about. Jim, you mentioned some variation within markets of where you're having harder times finding drivers than not. Apologize if this is common knowledge, but I'm wondering, where are some of those sore points, and do you have any specific ways you're dealing with that other than the driving school?
Yeah, so for us, what we found is it really is population density based, right? So operations that we have in Phoenix and Dallas and Houston and Miami and Atlanta, we tend to not have issues, but our smaller markets, we tend to have significant issues. So Carl's from Minnesota, which is where I'm from originally. neighboring state, Wisconsin, we have operations kind of throughout Wisconsin, all the way from Sorona, which is this little area of Rice Lake. It's probably 2 hours from Minneapolis, all the way up to Eagle Lake, which is the southern end of Lake Superior there. And those little small markets, it's really, really hard to find people.
There's a really great fudge shop in Eagle Lake. Just so you know.
I believe it.
Yeah.
It's beautiful country up there. But those little small markets we really struggle with. You know, on the West Coast, Montana, generally speaking, no big metro areas, and we struggle across the entire state. The economy also drives that a bit too, right? So I don't know how much you guys know about Whitefish, Montana, but that particular area is where Big Sky is, the ski area. And the growth there has been enormous, but it's also pushed regular people out because they can't afford to be there anymore. So what we try to do is really open up all the different opportunities that we have to recruit and hire people. And one of the areas that we've had a ton of success in is actually school bus drivers. Now I feel kind of bad that we're stealing a school bus driver because it's really hard for schools to find people too. But that's a very applicable job to what the waste and recycling is for residential work. You know, you're operating in residential neighborhoods, there's often kids around your vehicles. You know, they tend to be more cautious when they're driving their vehicles because they're used to driving with, you know, the most important capital there is, little kids. But that's what we've done is we've kind of targeted those more remote areas and then specific existing workforces that otherwise may not even consider coming to waste and recycling. So one of our biggest success stories, and I know there was a women's breakfast this morning, is in Baton Rouge. We have a woman who's our general manager there. And when she took over that operation, I think we had maybe 5 female drivers at that location. She started to recruit at a high school and elementary school for school bus drivers. They literally have close to 80 female drivers at that location right now. So they have a total of about 150 drivers, and over half of them are women. So, you know, thinking about different ways to approach people and looking for opportunities in markets that otherwise maybe we're having a hard time finding, you know, kind of going to the old fishing wells that we've always gone to doesn't work. Let's try something else.
Yeah. All right, pause for the audience. Any
There's a
questions?
question.
Yes.
I was trying to come up with a way to well formulate the question I have, but it's related to both like serving sort of underserved areas, remote areas, operating in those remote areas. We work in emergency services and disaster response. So I was wondering if y'all could say a little bit more, I guess, about thinking in that space, how you prepare for future disaster stuff, but also just operating in places where you may not have visibility, and just possible market developments around that. I know you all mentioned the cross-border work, but things like where in oil and gas environments, emergency response, those kinds of areas where there is sort of like this underserved visibility and these infrastructure, really just like infrastructure things where they might have to rely on things that are expensive, near military grade, satellite stuff, those kinds of gap areas where that's not changing, disasters aren't going away. So it's, as you can see, I'm struggling still with formulating the question.
Yeah, it's okay.
But if you could speak a little bit more to kind of the thinking around that and if it impacts your industries and kind of what that is on a broader scale, I'd be super interested.
Yeah, I'll try first on that. So within our industry, I classify a lot of that as a lone worker hazard situation. So, you know, we have landfills and recycling facilities and transfer stations that all have multiple people working on them, but in our remote areas, our drivers are by themselves out in the middle of potentially nowhere where they have no connectivity at all. And candidly, it's a really, really hard problem to solve for. And the only thing that we've found that's effective is periodic check-ins with them. We have issued a product out to our what we call remote workers from a company called Blackline. I don't know if anybody's familiar with them, but they're specialized in the oil and gas industry, and they really do monitors. So hydrogen sulfide is a really good example. When you're wearing one of those monitors, it'll go off if you're in the danger zone. But they also have a lot of connectivity for lone workers. So it's an ability for the worker to reach out if they have an emergency situation. But even Blackline's not 100% US coverage. And I mentioned Montana. It's a really good example where we operate outside of Bozeman, and that area of the country is just really sketchy. So there are products out there that can help you. I love what Motive said today in terms of trying to do different ways to stay in constant connection. But there are always going to be gaps, unfortunately. And Starlink, I think, is a good opportunity for people. But satellite phones, to your point, are really cost prohibitive. So trying to find the right answer for them is very, very tricky and challenging.
Yeah, and maybe adding on top, like, so it resonates quite a lot for you asked, because like in a previous life, I was on rigs, 6-week rotations on rigs, and when I first went out, like, we had no internet on the rig, so like we never connected in. So I wouldn't talk to family for 6 weeks, and the reality is, even then, autonomy, you became very autonomous. Obviously there was always satellite connections available, but the cost of it was so expensive, and especially during that time, we weren't willing to spend money where we didn't need to. And so right now, as I kind of look towards the technology that's going out there, part of it is yes, over time we'll get better connectivity in, but also it's giving the right tooling on the front. Like, you still, and especially in situations like that where there's high pressure in scenarios, you do need people to be making the decisions up front and trying to get people the most information within their local environment. So we had a lot of like local connectivity within our installations around like what was happening at different points of those installations, especially around like safety of workers. We had a lot of insights around like, where the permits are, where there's different work happening on the same site, and giving really good tools to the local group that are there. That helped a lot, like in terms of our safety overall when we were on site. And I think that's going to continue to develop, because also in some of those scenarios, you need to a certain extent, delegate out the responsibility for decision making. And so it just becomes much more important, rather than maybe some of the tooling. You have a lot of emphasis on the managers back in bases or things like that. It becomes really important what the frontline staff have in order to make the best decisions. So I see that as probably a big area where you'll see a good set of technology come out to support them.
So I have a question for you. So are you the people that you're talking about, are they remote in their location, or are they just pass through remote locations? I'm just curious.
It's a combination of both, but we also come in after disasters happen and set up temporary sites.
Yeah.
So we're bringing Starlink with us to have internet once we
Okay.
get there, but we lose visibility. Bringing trailers in, we might have 5 sites in an area, and then if there's no cell network because a storm knocked everything out, we either have to rely on
Yep.
them bringing in cell trailers or
Yep. So we do that emergency disaster relief work. We bring in the water and the food and the equipment, and we come in afterwards. So that's part of what our organization does. We have drivers that are driving throughout the entire country. Line haul goes Minneapolis, Tacoma. We have gentlemen every night that are driving Minneapolis to Chicago for air freight, things like that. And these drivers do encounter situations every day. So our forward training, when we are onboarding, and continuous training, is emergency action plans, being prepared, how to be prepared if you get stuck on the road in a specific situation, mandatory check-in calls, having the GPS. There's not a lot of activity we've seen where the GPS hasn't shown us where the truck is. In many situations, I mean, we've recovered an abandoned truck because of the GPS capabilities that Motive has. So it depends on how you go into it and what kind of training in advance too that you're giving your teams. So look at your training and how can you prepare these people for everything that they could possibly encounter before they're in this situation.
Yeah, just one last kind of follow-up statement along those lines too is one of the other things that I do is I'm on the board for I guess it's the Arizona, New Mexico region of the American Red Cross. I'm always sporting my Red Cross socks.
Nice.
But partnering with local Red Cross, depending on the size, there's other partnerships you could have that can really help you coordinate and make sure that everything is right in terms of your response. Because you're not the only ones there, then there's a response. There's other entities and organizations there. And that's kind of that public-private thing.
Right.
Red Cross is a little bit of both. They're a little bit public, a little bit private. They're not funded by the government, by the way. So
No, and
every
that's who
dollar.
we work with is Red Cross. So,
Yeah, every dollar the Red Cross gets in is philanthropic giving from companies and individuals. They don't get a penny from the government. So they're a great partner to work with when you do have those opportunities to work with them.
Any other questions from the crowd? Got a quick one then. Super easy, Hamish. I'm kidding. This one's
Yeah,
so confusing.
I was going to say, it's a question for Hamish, so it's going to be complicated.
No, this is like what I lie awake thinking about at night. So you mentioned kind of a decline in traffic at the Port of LA and increase in Mexico and sort of over land ports. I'm wondering, do you think that's like a direct transfer from one to the other? Like are people kind of maybe that would have been shipping straight into LA or shipping into Mexico and then, or what's going on with that? Why do you think that's happening?
Yeah, I think right now it's more of a reaction to decision making. So the anticipation of the tariffs coming in led to obviously the huge spikes of volumes coming in, especially China bound into the Port of LA. You saw a huge amount of volumes brought forward. And then as kind of tariffs solidified, it's like, well, there's now a wait and see approach. Nobody wants to be, nobody's sure of exactly what the future is going to be for a decision-making point of view. So what is the most, you have very few levers as a company. So you're going to wait and see is one. And so you can wait for a few weeks until you really have to make that final decision. That's basically what you're seeing en masse happen on the West Coast ports. It's just a wait and see approach. Now what's happening in southern borders is kind of, it's actually two things. One, if we actually look at what's been happening in Mexico since about 2018, it's a huge amount of foreign direct investments, but not just Chinese companies, US companies of 50% of the investment in northern states in Mexico is coming US driven. Huge amount of manufacturing facilities happened because reality is 2018 was a big shift where like a lot of companies diversified from and started manufacturing many parts of the world and breaking down their supply chain and looking at how to build more resilient supply chains. And so that investments is what's actually starting to come online. So actually, if you look at the back end of last year, you had about a 30% year-over-year increase in volumes coming in, even before we were really talking about tariffs. And so what's you've done is like accelerate that in the first part of the year in a very unseasonal trend. But when it comes to computer manufacturing, when it comes to vehicle manufacturing, these are years worth of investment in manufacturing facilities that are actually starting to ramp up and come online. So I think like it's often easy, and obviously you're part of media in this respect, looking at very closely at what's happening here and now. What I generally think about is like what happens over the long term. And so long-term trends, I feel, there's going to be these unseasonal disruptions. 2025 is going to be a bit all over the place. Long-term, couple things. Most things will move by truck. Doesn't matter where they come from. Like they're going to move across on the road. There's going to be a large amount of volumes. As long as the economy continues to perform well, those volumes will increase over time. And regardless, even if there's any recessions or flattens, it's a relative amount of volumes that change. The total volumes in the market will continue to improve over time. Where they come from may alter. And that's where I go back to what I said originally, like resilience matters. And in reality, it's one of the few things you can evaluate in what you can control is how to build those partnerships with different sets of companies, different organizations, and really like drive your revenue from different areas. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether it's tariffs or it was COVID 5 years ago, it was fuel price increases, there was the Suez Canal that got blocked up, there was the East Coast port strikes looming last year in January. It's great press coverage for that, but every 6 months you're getting something big that if you were over-indexed in certain markets could really impact you. So that's kind of like the only thing that when I think about this is long-term, how do you structure businesses to be more resilient? Overall, we're in a more chaotic time period than we have been in the last few decades, and you kind of just need to adapt to that situation.
I think that's the perfect note to end it on. Thank you all so much for coming out, and thank you all for your insight. Really great time.